You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are that of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, Secular Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. How can I live in society if I don't believe in God? How can I understand the world around me without religion? What can I do to make the world a better place? Where did we come from? How can I be a moral person? These are just some of the profound questions we as humans have pondered for millennia. Join us as we ponder these questions free from the ideologies of religion and superstition. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. This is your host, Andrew. Welcome to the very first episode of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. We have worked hard to put this show together and are excited about this series. The people involved with this production are members of FreeThought Fort Wayne and Secular Fort Wayne. You can find the FreeThought Fort Wayne page on Facebook and the Secular Fort Wayne group on meetup.com. We are a group of atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, secular humanists, and more. We come from all walks of life, but have all come to the same conclusion. We live our lives without religion and superstition. We thought it would be best to start our first episode with the question and answer segment. So take it away, V.
Hello and welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour Q&A segment with me, V. To submit a question to us, you can feel free to email us, fortwayneaha@gmail.com. You can give us a call at 260-376-2268, where you'll most likely have to leave a message. Another way to submit a question would be facebook.com/freethoughtfw or twitter.com/freethoughtfw. For now, I don't believe there's a way to accept questions from our webpage, but it is freethoughtfw.org. And before I begin with the questions, you'll notice I'm just going by V. The reason why I'm not using my full name here is because, and it's actually one of the reasons why the FreeThought Fort Wayne group got started. Humanism and atheism are very misunderstood in the U.S. these days, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So I'm just trying to prevent, these misunderstandings from affecting my work and personal life. I have a lot of family that may misunderstand what all this means and my intentions and things like that. So for now, I'll try to stick with V, and maybe as time goes on, I'll reveal my full name. My full name is very unique. There's probably only one person in Fort Wayne with that name, so the moment you hear it, you'll know exactly who I am. So this is the reason why I'm going with V. Please send us your questions. Any and all questions will be answered. Of course, there's inappropriate questions that we wouldn't answer, but if it's a question that relates to humanism, atheism, free thought, maybe some scientific questions, I have a science background, so I'll be able to answer some scientific questions, or if I don't know the answers, I'll know where good places are that will produce reliable information that I believe won't mislead anyone. The answers that I'm giving here are purely mine. They don't express any official view of FreeThought Fort Wayne or of American Humanist Association, of which we are a chapter. So please bear that in mind, that as I'm answering those are purely my own thoughts. So I guess without any further delay, let's jump into some of the more common questions that we get asked. And one of the questions that we often hear is, well, what is humanism? And there's really a short and a long answer to the question. The short answer It's really just three words: good without God. The long answer has to explain what God is and what good is. So, as humanists, most of us will identify as atheists, agnostics, something like that. So, we don't believe in a God. And by, I guess, some definitions of God, like the deistic God, um, may be actually compatible with humanism when Stephen Hawking talks about uncovering certain things about the universe, and that's how we'll know the mind of God. That that type of God being the universe may actually be compatible with humanism, but certainly the Christian God would probably not be. This gray bearded man in the sky that watches every moment of every day and supervises everything that happens, every once in a while intervenes through miracles. That type of God is not compatible with humanism in general. And I guess to go along with that, we have to also add supernatural forces. Maybe they're not identified as a god, but forces that cannot be explained through the normal scientific process, or outside of nature. Those type of forces would probably not be compatible with what most people would view as the humanist perspective. And so that's on God, and now on good. I believe most humanists would agree with me that questions of good and bad refer to the well-being of sentient creatures. So people, animals, you can't be good or bad with respect to a rock. A rock doesn't have feelings. If you break it, you didn't do anything bad, unless maybe that rock serves some kind of purpose for an animal or for a person, something like that. And if that person is affected positively or negatively, then that could be a moral or an immoral, a good or a bad action. But in general, you just have to look at, is a certain action or a certain event, was that beneficial or detrimental to the state of well-being of some creature? And the state of well-being of a creature can be easily evaluated through the use of observable and measurable things. So if you see somebody being beaten, that's obviously a bad thing. It's easy to see that action decreases the well-being of that person or animal. If that action causes pain, it would be bad. If you're feeding someone, that's a good thing. If you're helping someone that has fallen, that's a good thing, because it measurably improves the well-being of that person or animal or something like that. And also, it's not just physical things. There may be mental. Is a certain action positively affecting the mental state of an animal or negatively affecting the state of that animal? And oftentimes, those questions of good and bad are presented as being difficult and as questions where we probably need a God to guide us and to tell us what's good and bad. And we as humanists don't believe we need that. We believe that we can ourselves evaluate those questions through collaboration with other people. We can decide what's good and bad for our society, and we can make those moral judgments into perhaps laws or things like that. So another question that may be interesting to answer is, what is the difference between being a free thinker and a humanist? Our group is called FreeThought Fort Wayne, but we're a humanist group, so are those things the same? Are they different? And what I would say to that, in my opinion, humanism builds on top of free thinking. In that sense, you could be a free thinker and not be a humanist, but to be a humanist, you would have to be a free thinker. So, free thinking to me means that it's a dogma-free thinking. It means that you use your own reasoning skills to evaluate evidence, to determine, cause and effect in a given situation, to determine how to act in a given situation. So it very much resembles or is also the scientific method, where you make observations, you form hypotheses, you test that hypothesis through experiment, you try to disprove your hypothesis, and through that evaluation process, you reach some kind of conclusion. As I said, humanism is being good without God, and you're using the scientific method to evaluate the world, where just the bare free thinking, it's just a methodology that underlines humanism. So another question that we may be asked is, what gives meaning to your life as a humanist? And that's a really important question to answer, and it would take a long discussion to give it a good shake. But in short, as humanists, we decide what gives meaning to our lives. Some of us will find meaning in various things, in helping needy kids, in saving animals in distress. As humanists, we're free to decide that. We don't think that we need any kind of supernatural forces or gods to tell us what should and shouldn't give us meaning in our lives. In a sense, at least I feel this way, if I have meaning imposed on me by a god, it kind of cheapens that meaning. I value my freedom in all aspects of life, and you can argue whether we have free will or not, but I feel like I have sufficiently free will, and I am perfectly capable of deciding what gives me meaning. And I think that's generally true for most humanists out there. And I guess the last question for today that I'm going to answer is, what is the purpose of the FreeThought Fort Wayne group? And when we started the group, what our goal was just to provide a little bit of a sense of community for people that don't have any faith. If you're religious, that's not a problem for you. You can go to any church and find a little bit of a support structure. You can make new friends there. You can have this sense of belonging to a community, and we felt like that was lacking for people that don't have faith. So that was really how it all started. it has grown tremendously over time. Our membership has grown. So now it really has become more of a community. We have regularly scheduled events. The coffee shop meeting at Old Crown on Sundays at 11. We've done tremendous amounts of events over the last year, from the picnic to cleanups. We have a project where we're gonna gift things to homeless people around town, so we're trying to do a little bit of community service as well. So it really has grown, and it has become a community. And with that, I just want to remind everybody to send us their questions. And to do that, there's more than one way. You can email us at fortwayneaha@gmail.com. You can leave us a message at 260-376-2268. Or you can leave us a message at twitter.com/FreeThoughtFW, Facebook.com/FreeThoughtFW. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you, V, for that enlightening segment. Next up, we have a couple of FreeThought members discussing the power of I am.
For this next segment, we're going to take a humanist perspective on the sermon by Pastor Joel Osteen titled The Power of I Am. Kind of how I stumbled upon this was my CEO, the company I work for, every Friday morning has a little meeting, powwow. He kind of stands among the cubicles and gives us sales updates. He, little motivationals, things like that. A couple weeks ago, the main message was on the power of I am, and I could tell this was more of a religious slanted theme, and typically when this happens, I kind of just twiddle my thumbs, look at my cell phone, get distracted. But on this particular day, I took a chance. I took a moment to actually look at the source material, and I came across. I went straight to YouTube, and I came across the sermon. It was a full sermon, and it was actually on Oprah Winfrey's channel on YouTube. So I invite you to go check that out and see what's going on with that. And with me today is Chris. Say hello, Chris.
Hello.
And we have both watched the movie, and we're now going to kind of talk about it. The basic premise of Joel's message is that whatever follows the I am in a statement, that's what's going to come looking for you. So, for example, if you say, I am so tired, tiredness is going to come looking for you. If you say, I am so ugly, then you're going to feel ugly. So, Chris, basically on a plain level, how does that make you feel? What do you think about that?
Well, the premise itself is actually pretty logical and makes a lot of sense just from a biological perspective, because of the fact that you have things called the placebo effect, which of course many people are familiar with, where if you think something is going to be or have a positive effect on you, then you're going to feel positively about whatever that is. So that's regardless of whether you're taking a sugar pill or if you're being told that, hey, this person is laying hands on you and you're supposed to be healed. That's all part of the placebo effect. The nocebo effect is the opposite. So that's kind of what they're particularly targeting in this talk, was that if you say, I am tired, that's a negative thing. And the nocebo effect basically says if you believe something negative will happen to you, then you will experience negative symptoms. So it was pretty cool from a perspective of saying that, hey, this is psychology in humans, to say that our brains have such an influence on our lives that if we think some way, then that way will somehow have an influence on our life and manifest itself physically in some aspect.
Yeah, of course. I mean, now I have to say that I've actually done this myself. Since watching this video, I've kind of taken some of these practices in at times, because of course it can be nerve-wracking to come on the radio and do your own radio show. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so if you say, I am a good broadcaster, I am worthy of my own segment on the radio, you kind of build yourself up, and it's definitely something that you can draw strength from. And I think, of course, he's going to attribute this to a higher being, power from God. But I think he doesn't give a whole lot of credit to people's inner strength, the power of the mind, the power of what someone can do when they really put their mind to it. I mean, I'm sure you've been in a work environment where someone's kind of a negative Nancy, really down on themselves, their job, they're not happy, and they bring everyone else down around them.
So I guess my problem is that typically in my jobs, I almost take the opposite standpoint, just from the fact that I try to do my job as best I can, and I get irritated when I see the other people around me not doing their job as best as they can. And so I'm almost a negative Nancy from the standpoint of, hey, you other guys aren't doing so well. I can do this. You can do this. Let's do this, and let's get it done right and do it well. So I try to use mine more as a motivating factor to try to get them to a performance level that I feel is completely achievable and that is achieved by a number of other people. So I don't, yeah, I definitely don't take the standpoint of negative Nancy that, hey, I suck, because every morning when I wake up, even before watching this video, I had the standpoint of, hey, I'm pretty awesome. So I just kind of go that route for the entire rest of my day, and you know what, I end up doing some pretty cool things. So I feel like it's been a good life philosophy for me.
Right, and I think Joel kind of touches on this a little bit. He's talking about when people say things about you, you get in your head, and then they kind of, that distorts your thinking, and it makes you who you are. He says what someone says about you doesn't determine your destiny, God does. So I mean, if it just, there are many times in this where I'm thinking, he brought up the statement, you'll always struggle with your weight. And I'm thinking, if you have someone in your life that's telling you that, get them out of your life. That's a negative relationship, and you don't need those type of people around you. I mean, of course, he's saying that there are forces constantly trying to make you feel intimidated, inferior, and unqualified. And once again, if you are in that sort of space, that's not going to be very conducive to personal growth, to strength, to confidence.
Right.
So, is this a divine power that you're drawing from, or is this just like you said? Is this human nature? Is this human psychology?
Well, so I guess one of the things that kind of frustrated me, just go slightly off topic just a little bit, was how he would sit here and state that God made you like you are. And okay, that's great if you want to say that. But then he goes on later to say, you are how God says you are. I'm like, okay, well, that's all right. That's along the same lines. Absolutely. And then he continues to say, well, you are going to have to tell God what you are, because you have to actually physically speak, I am beautiful, in order for it to happen. So I guess my problem with that was that it almost created a synchronous loop, to where you're not sure if that power, that strength is coming from God, or if it's coming from you, because he's saying, well, it comes from you and it comes from God.
Right. He's bestowed upon you this strength, but it's not going to happen until you realize it.
Right. So,
but until you realize it, it's there, but it's not. It's
right.
It's a weird sort of paradox.
Yeah. Paradox. There you go. That's a good word for it. So yeah, I definitely see a lot of wishy-washiness in some of this, just because of that fact. And unfortunately, when it comes to, at least from what I've seen and heard, some of the arguments by certain religious groups, they end up at a cyclical argument. And I'm sorry, that's not a good way to debate someone if you have a cyclical argument, because there's no beginning to it, there's no end to it, and there's really no way to fight it, because it's internally consistent or inconsistent, as the case would be in many cases. So it's very frustrating for me to see those situations and think of how to respond, because there is no way to respond, because no matter what, they're right.
Yeah. For example, a cyclical argument may be, why do you believe something? And you say, because the Bible is true. Well, how do you know the Bible is true? Because God says so. I mean, it's always going to be coming back. It's like a snake eating its tail. It's always coming back around. Going back to the wishy-washiness, Joel tells a story about a man he plays basketball with, where every time an important shot would come up and he would miss it, he would say, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I am so stupid. All this and that." And towards the end of the story, he's trying to be funny, but he goes, "Well, I hate to say it, but I think stupid found him, or I think idiot found him." Like, okay, so you're saying don't say that to people around you, build people up, and yet you're going in front of. I mean, this is a mega church. This is hundreds of thousands of people plus millions of viewers on TV, and he's saying these things about someone he calls his friend. Yeah, there is a bit of are you practicing what you preach? Are you really building this guy up? That sort of thing, and it just kind of it's funny that that he put that in there.
Yeah, definitely.
One other interesting thing that I saw, or that he mentions, is a gentleman who has a job in a local factory, and he's there for years and years, and people tell him he's stupid, he never advances, and one day he gets fed up or something, and he goes to another factory across town. They give him an IQ test for hiring practices, which I didn't think was a thing. I thought it was just kind of a story plot, but I Googled it, and it is. This is actually, I didn't think IQ tests were very valid.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It could be subjective, that sort of thing, but it is, unbeknownst to me. And so he takes this IQ test, and he gets genius levels. That's the highest level. They've never seen this in the history of the company. And I know it's a parable. I know it's just a story, but I find this to be kind of absurd. I find this to, he's no smarter than he was when they told him. There was nothing stopping him from performing at those levels, but now, he took this test, this arbitrary test, and now he's the greatest man in the world. I mean, it's insane. What did you get out of that?
Yeah, so that situation was interesting from a number of perspectives. Most notably because of the fact that I have been teaching at the middle, high school, and college levels for a few years now, and I've definitely seen the importance of not bringing kids down, trying to bring them up. And so I've seen similar situations to that in the fact that I've seen kids that have been kicked down and told that they're stupid and told they can't do anything, and that's just the mentality they end up taking, regardless of whether or not those statements are true. And that especially comes out when I get to do some one-on-one tutoring, which I also do on the side. And the kids just get this mentality such that it just poisons every other aspect of their lives, such that it really does just take them over entirely. And so sometimes it just takes that one instance of either somebody or something coming in and telling them that, hey, they're capable, hey, they're intelligent. All they needed was just a little bit of assistance along the way. And that's especially easy to see when you're working with more of the kids in the slower classes or in the mentally handicapped classes. Those kids in particular are the most highly affected by this phenomenon, I think. And so there are some kids that are in the slow classes in middle school, and they just continue being put in those classes all through high school, and really it retards their growth as an individual, because they're taught that they are always slow, they're always going to be slow, and there's no way out of it. Whereas, you never get that way with the advanced classes, because then you're awesome, and if you're not awesome, well, then you're not going to get the grade that you need to stay in the awesome classes, and then you get kicked out of those classes. And that's a much better self-regulating phenomenon than it is the negative connotations brought about by the slower classes.
Yeah, so you're saying that's like a bias or a stigma. Like,
right.
Okay, well, you're in this class, you may never amount to anything because you didn't take AP physics when you were in, high school, something
right.
like that.
And, they can perform well in those classes. They can get, A's and whatever, but there are cases where they will never be put in higher level classes because they're like, okay, well, you're performing well for a slow student. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the mentality we need to be taking with these kids in order to help them reach their full potential.
Correct. Yeah. So kind of, along that line, I did see some things or see where this could be harmful in some ways. Of course, when he talks about, I am beautiful, you're going to feel beautiful. But a couple statements that he made along the lines of, I am well, mainly I am healthy, or I am full, I am not hungry, those sort of things. I see that could be very harmful in a mindset, where someone is actually having a lot of troubles. You were talking about mental handicaps earlier. Be that depression, be that learning disabilities, that sort of thing. If someone is in a position where they need that actual extra help, just saying, I am capable of doing this. I am not. I have no boundaries, that sort of thing. That's not always going to accomplish the task. There's going to be some extra help needed in that, and especially if you're going home every day and you're hungry, if you have no food in your cabinet and you're saying, I am full, I understand, living within your means and enjoying what you have, but to an extent, if you have nothing, sometimes you have nothing. There's no two ways around it, no matter, what outlook you have on it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I don't normally think about the Gandhi situation, but that's an excellent excellent way to look at it. I was more concerned about what he said in there as well, as far as being 300 pounds and saying, hey, well, this is me. I am healthy. I'm not overweight. And that bothers me, because that's actually a falsehood. I mean, it's good to be happy with your body, but it shouldn't be wrong to expect better from yourself and from your body.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I think saying these things puts it in your mind, and then you make plans to go ahead and execute that. If that's what you are really, looking for, if it's something that you're really going to set your mind to, great. These are things that, might enable you to better focus on your goals, to realize what you want, and to make steps to make that happen. But, like you said, if you're overweight and you're basically saying, I don't have heart disease now, but maybe in a couple of years when I'm walking up the stairs or physically exerting myself and something happens, where does that come into play?
Yeah, and the other thing that has to be considered in this too is that, I'm sorry, there are some things that you aren't going to be able to change, and things that will never change. For instance, the whole genetics that lie between and behind everything that is you. You can't change those. Now, obviously, you can change the regulation of those genes, but you can't change the genes themselves. So if you have a kid with Down syndrome, they will always have Down syndrome. Now, does that mean that they shouldn't push themselves to be the best they can be? No, of course not. They should. But you know what? They're never going to be able to change that. And that's just something they have to accept. They're always going to look like they have Down syndrome. They're always going to have certain things that are associated with that disease, regardless of what they think about it. And I think that was one of the dangerous things that I saw about this, is that there are facts involved in this that will not change and will never change based on how you think of them. No matter how much you want to think that the moon is not slowly slipping away from Earth's orbit, it's never going to change it. Your thoughts on the matter are irrelevant.
Right. Social constructs can be changed, can be looked at in different perspectives.
Right.
But genetics, family history, that sort of thing, that is not something that you can just wake up one morning and fix. You can't will yourself to not have, say, an alcoholic gene in your family. If you know that you can't have alcohol, you can't have alcohol. If that's going to take you to a bad place, it's not a matter of talking about it positively. So there are definitely things, that I felt like I could take away from this, like I said, but there are some things that we should maybe take with a grain of salt and evaluate further.
And I think another thing that I would really urge caution on with this kind of mentality is that being a biologist, I get bothered and agitated when I see so much human superiority, because humans, honestly, when you look at, are just another animal, another species on this planet. They really don't have domain over the whole universe, and sometimes they get lost and confused about that. They start thinking that, hey, they can literally control and change their destiny, even predict their destiny in some cases, and I'm sorry, you are in control of your destiny to a certain degree, but there's a certain degree that is completely random and has absolutely nothing to do with you. And the other thing, of course, is when you start talking about having a soul, and the existence of spirits and ghosts and things, you don't really hear about that in reference to any other creature on this planet. You only hear about that in reference to humans. So humans kind of have this thing built in where they think that they're special and different. And I think that's dangerous to think that way, because then that leads us to start sacrificing every other organism around us for our own purposes. So basically I see, situations where humans go in and they completely annihilate every organism in that location, whether it be a plant, a tree, an animal, and they just harvest all those resources, thinking that they're so much better and they need all those resources. But really, we need to find a way to work with the planet in a balanced way to not exterminate every other species to where you just have human beings in the end. And so that's the direction that I take some of the messages contained in this particular sermon.
Yeah, I definitely see that for sure. So to kind of close this up, was this the first encounter you've had with Mr. Osteen?
Yeah, my first time ever seeing him. I've actually sat down and talked with a Christian presenter of sorts a number of years ago when I was getting my master's, and he definitely wasn't quite as cheery and positive as this guy was. I'll admit, this guy was smiling the entire time, and I really didn't think that was possible, but he sure did
in
it.
this line, yeah, he's a televangelist, and like I said, he's got millions that he broadcasts to in many countries, and charisma definitely plays a role in that. I mean, you can't get up there and just like, hey, hello, God's love be upon you. You've really got to sell it. You've really got to be cheesy. You've really got to, just ham it up. So, he's not the only one who does this, but he's definitely unique amongst many that we see. But so with that being said, would you look to Mr. Osteen again for any advice or any guidance in your life?
I try to avoid, as terrible as that sounds, I do try to avoid religious entities as giving advice, because I always find at least 100 problems with the things that they're saying, because they're not biologically accurate or psychologically relevant, and they try to attribute everything to a magical super being that lives up in the clouds. So I namely only use these things to have topics for discussion and start thinking about what is accurate about what they are saying, because it tends to be a very small amount of significance in what they're saying. But I'll give them credit. This was actually pretty good, because of the fact that there is a lot of power in what you say and the attitude that you take towards life, and how that attitude will help you achieve or not achieve in life later on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and going back to that, what you were saying about looking at religious guidance. Yeah, I've read the Bible, and many of Jesus's words are in parable. And if you're in a place in your life where you're looking for truth, and you can take a parable and have, I want to say spin, but if you can have different perspectives on it from 4, 5, 6 different ways, or everyone's going to get a little bit something different out of it, is that really truth? If your experiences are slanting that story, that's not it can't be duplicated, it can't be tested. What can we do? This is not something that we can necessarily base truth off of. So, that's about all the time we have for now. Let's wrap this up. We'll be back with more after this break.
Well, not so much as a break as just a transition to our next segment. Here's Ty Downs with his segment, Backgrounds and Foregrounds, where he interviews a person to discover how and why they are who they are.
Today's guest interview is with Christopher Rex. Christopher holds a Master of Science of Biology from the University of Northern Colorado and is currently an adjunct biology professor at Ivy Tech Community College here in Fort Wayne. I initially met Christopher through his active involvement with FreeThought Fort Wayne. He is an avid advocate, promoter, and educator of the sciences, and will be hosting his own show on WELT, airing on Thursdays from 6 to 7 p.m., called Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meets logic and scientific facts. Christopher also has a strong personal and scientific interest in snakes and has been active in snake venom research, outreach, and education throughout his career and education. You can also read some of his articles at hubpages.com/@ChristopherJRex.com. This interview was recorded on December 23rd, 2015 in Christopher's apartment. I hope you enjoy my interview with Christopher Rex.
Christopher, where are you going with your life? What are you doing with yourself?
Gosh, where am I going? That's a great question. Currently, I'm teaching, and I guess I'm just kind of teaching till I get accepted into a PhD program at some point. That way I can continue my own education, get my PhD in biology. What I'd really like to do is start up my own research lab, snake venom research preferably, but whatever. I also had the side goal of being an educator and a speaker and a presenter, whether it be related to snakes or whether it be related to atheism. So that's another reason, I guess you could say a more nefarious reason why I've tried to become part of FreeThought, just because I like having that avenue available to me so I can have some sort of active role and active voice in the atheist community. So yeah, that's essentially where I see myself. I'd like to eventually give TED Talks. That's kind of one of my lead goals when it comes to being a presenter, since those are very nice. So I feel that that's a reachable goal for me. I just have to get on it.
So there's got to be some story behind the snake love. You've obviously taken a real keen interest in this. How did that develop?
Well, what's interesting is that I started out, I spent much of my upbringing fishing, funny enough, and that was a fortunate consequence of my mother, who saw fit to go fishing and horseback riding as much as possible. Nice. Horseback riding was okay. Fishing was where it was really fun. Now, the nice thing about fishing is that it exposed you to other animals that I only later came to love. So things like turtles and salamanders and frogs, cold-blooded creatures. Now snakes, the few times I'd interacted with snakes, they were a stick that ended up moving. And that startled me.
Right.
It caught me off guard, and it scared me. And so I wasn't terribly into snakes at all, actually, until middle school, when I started watching this crazy television show on Animal Planet called Crocodile Hunter. Indoshay's Big Adventure, actually. And so I was watching these shows, and these guys had a proclivity for reptiles, most particularly snakes. And that was cool. And they got me more comfortable with snakes just by watching them and how comfortable they were with snakes. And so, me being the scientific mind I was, I studied their methods of snake handling and saw fit to imitate it as closely as I could. And so about freshman year of high school, my freshman biology class went out to the school pond, and I had the opportunity to capture a garter snake, which garter snakes were prolific around this pond.
Sure.
And so I took advantage of the situation, picked up the snaky, and sure enough, it was a magical moment.
Love at first touch.
Yeah, no, it was a very biblical moment, actually. I should say. The light shone down from the heavens. The angels sang and played their flutes.
Speaking in tongues.
I didn't speak in tongues at the time. I learned parcel tongue later, once Harry Potter came out. But no. So basically, I had a moment where I got to see a snake up close, and for some reason or other, I instantly fell in love with the animal.
That was like the starting point for, sounds like, your eventual journey into biology.
Right, so that started me on snakes, and basically what happened from there was, as I learned more about them, I learned about their venom. As I learned more about venom, I learned what was most challenging about it. And what was most challenging was the variation in the venom composition within an individual snake.
Really?
And I was simultaneously also looking into spiders because I was curious about spiders throughout most of my upbringing anyway, but both spiders and snakes seem to have a lot of variation between individuals of the same species. And that was interesting to me. And the fact that we didn't know what causes all that variation was appalling. I couldn't understand why or how we couldn't possibly know these things because they're so easy to test.
And you said that there's variation within a single snake. Is that what you're saying, or within a single species?
Both. I'm saying
both.
Okay. It was just, I couldn't believe that we couldn't understand everything within a population, all the differences within the population between individuals, much less the fact that we knew absolutely nothing about within an individual snake.
Wow.
And so basically I set forth at that point to have a goal that I want to reach, where I have a bunch of snakes, a bunch of baby snakes preferably, and I raise them on different diets and see what influences on venom composition those different diets have.
Wow. There's a lot of research that can be put into that, it sounds like.
The reason why that was important was because the venom composition within each snake might vary based on what you feed it. And that would be important for cases where we raise venomous snakes in the lab or in some kind of captive setting for venom research or for anti-venom production or for whatever. So that's kind of important to know if what you're doing to it to keep it alive inside the lab is actually changing the output, which would of course basically meaning that you could have anti-venom that's less effective because you're raising the snakes in captivity. And unless they're being bitten in captivity, that anti-venom is not going to be as effective as it would be if you're collecting it from wild snakes, which are where people are typically getting bitten.
Well, you have been doing this since you were 11. Is that right? Since you were 11, you've had some serious questions about...
I've always been scientific.
Okay.
I've always loved science. I've always studied science. I've always wanted to be a detective of sorts, a lead investigator.
Why is that the case? Why were you so much different than me? What is there something in your upbringing? Was it your DNA? What was it that made you that way?
I guess I loved asking questions and figuring out what the answers were. And I was frequently frustrated coming to people that didn't know what I was seeking. And
you experienced this even at the age of 11?
Oh, long before it.
Really?
Long before it. And so even in elementary school, second grade in particular, I can remember, I actually started getting supplemental science books that were far beyond the content that we were being taught in class because I just kept asking questions.
Wow.
And kept wanting to learn more. Even from simple things like human anatomy to, the astronomy and the stars. And I just had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge.
For the common man, understanding the current state and the history of any particular topic is quite an undertaking. Civilization has provided people who have the ability to understand a topic or concentrate on a particular topic their entire life to go far beyond what somebody like me can possibly comprehend in detail. Would it be your opinion that somebody as common as me, take my word for that, could understand topics with any kind of authentic surety?
There is this resource I know of. It's an online resource, and I've attempted to do that with regards to the Big Bang Theory and to abiogenesis, which is the creation of life from non-life.
Sure.
So essentially, I've written articles online trying to take someone from a perspective of not knowing anything and build them up to the point where they know and understand how we can think that the Big Bang came from nothing and could have spontaneously formed as a result of the current laws of physics and quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
The other article on abiogenesis is talking about how life could have come from abiotic factors in early Earth environment, strictly from our knowledge of chemistry and random events, essentially. Basically going to show that creation of the universe could have been spontaneous and random, and the creation of life could have been spontaneous and random. I'm currently working on the evolution article showing how the process of evolution from that single organism resulting from abiogenesis could have resulted in all the current forms of life. I haven't published that article yet. So those are at least 2 or 3 articles worth of sources that I believe are ways that you can build up your knowledge to a point where you can feel somewhat comfortable with the scientific understanding behind some of these principles. And so I honestly just think it comes down to having a teacher, not saying that I'm the best one at all, but
Sure.
A teacher like Bill Nye, for instance. Bill Nye is very, very good at building people up in their knowledge base so that they kind of understand more and more about very advanced topics from a very simplistic view. And that's been one of my goals in my articles as well. So I believe that with the right teacher, you can very adequately do that with a layman such as yourself, so to speak.
Okay, well that makes me feel a lot better about it.
Because you know what, I read I try to read some articles on car mechanics and how to fix my car, and I still just look at it and say, nope.
Yeah, well,
I'm not doing that.
I find that I often struggle with that idea. Like I understand the science behind a lot of things, but to a certain extent I'm taking a lot of this stuff on faith. But I can't really tell the difference, to be honest with you, as a layman. I cannot tell the difference. I kind of rely to some extent on what is considered general knowledge. I mean, how do you... You're a scientist, so you get to deal with this stuff on a much higher level than I do. How does somebody like me deal with that?
So, you touched on 2 different things. Both of which are things I try to talk about and emphasize in my biology classes I teach. One of which gets at the fact that, both of which are related to education, of course. And so, one of which is talking about statistics. Most people don't realize the role that statistics plays in science. And in science, depending on which field you're in, we typically talk about a significant result as being something that, if you were to do this experiment this exact way, using these methods, you would expect a significant, substantial result that is indicative of a real thing 19 out of 20 times.
Okay.
So you would expect a failure rate, so to speak, 1 out of 20 times, which is 5%. That's typically an accepted value in science, is a failure rate of 5%. So when you hear stories of these, whistleblowers of climate change and such, that's even lower of an amount than 5%. It's actually about 0.1% when it comes to that kind of stuff. And so what that's to say is that you would expect a spurious, random result that's indicating something that's not really there 1 out of 20 times, or about 5%. And this rate is much, much lower when it comes to climate change, which means that is a much more real phenomenon than we give it credit for. So, there's that. There's also the fact that when it comes to science, we, as scientists, we have this kind of innate jerk in all of us. to where we want to prove everyone else wrong. Because that's where it's awesome. That's where it's great.
Sure.
Is being able to go up to another scientist at a conference and be like, hey, you know what? Your study sucks, and all of that's crap.
Wow.
So it's confounding to me to see that people think the complete opposite, that there's complete agreement amongst scientists, that there's this, what do you want to say, conspiracy behind science, because there's not. All science is a bunch of jerks trying to disprove each other. That's all it is. And so when it comes to science, it's a very self-correcting thing, because the jerks will find out the things that don't work and then prove them wrong.
That's funny, because I actually feel a lot more comfortable about the science, realizing how strongly ego plays a part in it.
It is. It really is.
Because I know how powerful that can be.
But you know what? It's great, because sometimes scientists make mistakes. They make that 1 out of 20 mistake.
Sure.
And you know what? Years later, they come to accept it and realize it. And they're like, you know what? I was wrong when I was 25 years old. I'm sorry about that. Apparently, the world actually works this way.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and Secular Fort Wayne on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.